girl who vanished 5 years ago from a small village. That day, Mariam went out to play with her friends, and she never came back. Her parents searched everywhere, got help from the police, but there was no trace of her. But the real story doesn't end there. Some people say she was kidnapped. Others believe she ran away on her own. But after that night, strange things began happening in the village. Some villagers claimed they saw a girl who looked exactly like Mariam, wandering the streets at night, and she was whispering softly, "Don't uncover the truth." The police closed the case, but a few investigators were determined to uncover the mystery of Mariam's disappearance. One day, an investigator, while working on the case, came across an old book. In the book, there was a mysterious symbol, one that was tied to the village's ancient history. The investigator followed the clues and ventured into the village's old, abandoned buildings. There, he found a room that had been sealed for years. As soon as he opened the door, there, right in front of him, hung a portrait of Mariam. Beneath it, the words were carved, "Some truths are meant to stay hidden forever." Those were the words that sent a chill down the investigator's spine as he stood in front of the eerie painting of Mariam. 5 years ago, she had vanished without a trace, and now her picture hung in this abandoned room with a cryptic message beneath. Some truths should never be uncovered. The investigator's heart pounded as he noticed a hidden door in the corner of the room. He hesitated for a moment, but the pull of curiosity was stronger. Slowly, he opened the door and found himself in a narrow, pitch-dark tunnel. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he cautiously moved forward. What awaited him at the end of this tunnel? At the end of the tunnel, he stumbled upon a strange chamber, its floor etched with ancient symbols. In the center lay an old, dusty book with another ominous message. "The truth is something you will never comprehend." Suddenly, out of the shadows, voice lowers, a faint figure appeared. It was her, Mariam. She looked exactly the same as the day she disappeared. Slowly, she raised her head and, with a sorrowful expression, whispered, "Leave, or you too will be lost forever." The investigator's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" he stammered. "Are you really Mariam?" But before he could get an answer, her figure vanished, leaving him alone in the chilling darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, he quickly searched the chamber and found another ancient book. As he flipped through its pages, his hands trembling, he discovered the terrifying truth. Mariam's family had been the guardians of a dark secret, one that had been passed down through generations. Her disappearance was no accident. It was a ritual, a sacrifice to keep that secret buried. The investigator now had a choice: reveal this dreadful secret to the world and face the inevitable consequences, or bury it forever, just as Mariam had. But remember this: some truths are better left untold. California, 1968. The summer of love had just ended, and a sense of peace and optimism filled the air. But something dark was about to grip Northern California, a nightmare with a name: the Zodiac Killer. Over the next few years, this unidentified man would terrorize the area with brutal attacks on innocent people. He seemed to choose his victims at random, young couples, sometimes alone and vulnerable. No one knew where he would strike next. The randomness of it, the sheer unpredictability, is what terrified everyone. It all began on December 20th, 1968. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, a teenage couple, were on their first date, enjoying a quiet evening out. They stopped at a lover's lane on Lake Herman Road, a peaceful place for young couples. But that night, peace turned to horror. They were found shot in their car without any explanation. It was a senseless, cold-blooded killing, and no one knew why or who could have done it. The police were stumped, but it was the beginning of something they never expected. 6 months later, the killer struck again. Another couple, Darlene Farron and Mike Mageau, were attacked while parked in Vallejo. This time, the killer left one survivor, Mike, who would later describe his horror at seeing a figure approach their car with a flashlight, and then gunfire. After this second attack, something chilling happened. A letter arrived at 3 major Bay Area newspapers. the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. The sender took credit for the killings and signed it simply the Zodiac. In his letters, Zodiac taunted the police. He included a cryptic cipher with strange symbols and demanded that his letters be published in the newspapers, or else he would kill again. This code was so complicated, so bizarre, that it baffled both the public and professional cryptologists alike. But what he wrote within those letters was even more disturbing. He called the murders just the beginning. Can you imagine the terror that spread throughout the area? People were too afraid to go out at night. Couples avoided quiet, secluded spots. The Zodiac had turned ordinary life into something filled with paranoia and dread. As more letters came in, each more cryptic than the last, the Zodiac Killer described his thrill for killing. In one letter, he claimed to have a list of slaves he was collecting for his afterlife. The cryptic and arrogant tone sent shivers down the spine of every reader. One of Zodiac's early codes, known as the 408-character cipher, was eventually cracked by a local schoolteacher and his wife. They found that the message didn't provide any personal information about the killer. Instead, it included twisted statements like, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The eerie message seemed to show a mind driven by violence and mystery. In September 1969, the Zodiac struck again at Lake Berryessa. A young couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were relaxing by the lake when a hooded figure approached. He wore a strange costume, marked with a symbol similar to a crosshair, the same symbol he used in his letters. After tying them up, he stabbed both of them in broad daylight. Brian survived, but Cecilia did not. He later recounted the horror of seeing Zodiac's cold, methodical movements, as if he was performing some kind of twisted ritual. The Zodiac's signature continued to haunt every letter. He seemed to know he couldn't be caught. He bragged about his killings, and every time he sent a letter, it was like he was adding fuel to the fire, reminding everyone he was still out there. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, but every time they thought they were close, Zodiac would evade them. The FBI, local police, and even amateur sleuths joined forces to crack his ciphers, analyze handwriting, and follow thousands of tips. But the Zodiac had a skill for misdirection. He thrived on keeping people guessing. By 1974, the letters stopped, but Zodiac's shadow loomed over California. No more victims were claimed, and yet no arrest was ever made. Decades passed, and while new suspects were questioned and theories arose, no definitive proof was found. DNA testing, fingerprints, and other modern forensics were brought into the case years later, but the Zodiac had covered his tracks well. To this day, the Zodiac Killer's identity remains a mystery. He left behind a legacy of fear and unanswered questions. His case is one of the most chilling reminders that sometimes darkness slips through even the tightest nets. And somewhere out there, the name Zodiac remains as haunting and mysterious as it was over 50 years ago.